you for joining the ASH National 2021 Conference Session on Automated Work Zone Speed Enforcement. My name is Ralph Eberhardt, Office Executive in Allentown, Pennsylvania for Michael Baker International, and pleased to be your moderator for this construction track session. We're excited to share this important content and to provide the opportunity for knowledge transfer and idea sharing. A little housekeeping before I introduce Ben and Mahmood. Please be sure to utilize the Q&A chat function on the right side of your screen, as our speakers will make themselves available to answer questions at the end of their presentation. Note that you can also vote up a question using the up arrow next to it. Jim Brady will be facilitating the Q&A. Afterward, our event manager will move us all back to the Track 3 lobby for networking and refreshments. Also, you will see links posted in the chat window, including a link to the PDH form for this session and a link to the main lobby. Just quickly, the PDH certificates will be issued shortly after the conference concludes, if not before. And if you wish to leave the session, just click on the lobby link. Should you experience any technical issues during the presentation, you can email the conference help desk. I believe that's also posted in the chat, but that email address is 2021helpdesk@ash.pro. Again, 2021helpdesk@ashe.pro. Okay, so I'm now pleased to introduce your presenters for Automated Work Zone Speed Enforcement. Ben Snyder is a senior project engineer at RK&K Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with more than 10 years of experience. He began his career with RK&K in 2010. He has served as a design and project engineer on numerous design projects and planning studies for various clients, including Pennsylvania DOT, the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. Ben currently serves as the Deputy Project Manager for the Automated Work Zone Speed Enforcement Program. Mahmood Shehata is a transportation manager, also with RK&K, however, in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, focusing on traffic engineering and ITS services. Much of his experience has been focused on freeway and arterial congestion mitigation projects, and regionally has been at the forefront of these types of solutions for many years. Mahmood is also serving as the program administrator for the statewide Automated Work Zone Speed Enforcement Program, a joint Pennsylvania DOT, Pennsylvania Turnpike, and Pennsylvania State Police effort. He is the current president of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Mid-Atlantic Section, a member of the Leadership ITE Class of 2020, and a member of Pennsylvania's statewide Transportation Innovation Council. Mahmood and Ben, the stage is yours.
Ralph, thank you for the introduction, and thank you everybody for spending some of your time this afternoon with us today. We were certainly pleased to get out and share our experience in Pennsylvania with Automated Work Zone Speed Enforcement. We feel it's a pretty important program. Anything we can do to help slow speeds in work zones and help save lives is a worthwhile effort, and we're very proud and happy to be a part of it. In today's discussion, we'll talk a little bit about kind of what automated speed enforcement in work zones, or what we call it in Pennsylvania, AWIS is, why we chose it, how we got to this point, how we developed the program, and really kind of our first year of operations and what are the things that we've learned. We will spend a little bit of time talking about what the legislation in Pennsylvania that enables the use of AWIS talks about, and kind of how we got to this point. And throughout, you'll hear some alluding to some things. I will say, and I think Ben will agree with me wholeheartedly, that starting a statewide program like this, kind of coinciding exactly with the pandemic, restrictions on travel and construction here in Pennsylvania. Maybe wasn't the most ideal timing, but certainly some interesting things that we learned throughout that process. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, Ben. So wanted to maybe start a little bit by kind of in general talking about what automated speed enforcement really is and kind of in the abstract and the bigger picture. It's really three components. The first is some type of speed timing device detects a vehicle traveling through an area, whether it's a work zone, residential zone, school zone, whatever the case may be, traveling at an excessive speed. The vehicle then takes photos of the license plate of the vehicle that is traveling through that spot. And then from there, actually then identifies the responsible party through the license plate and vehicle records. With that, of course, there is a pretty significant verification component that we'll talk about as well, and really kind of notifying folks. So in Pennsylvania, why AWIS? Why are we focusing on our work zones is really the first real statewide use of this technology and this approach. Quite frankly, it is because our work zones in the Commonwealth here are dangerous places, and we want to do everything we can, like we said, to reduce speeds and really keep people safe. Quite frankly, there's been a focus on work zone safety in the Commonwealth for a while. Despite all of those efforts, we've seen a pretty consistent increase from about 2012 to 2018, about 2% increase in annual crashes, to the point where in 2018 and even in 2019, we were seeing crashes hovering around 1,800, work zone crashes hovering around 1,800 vehicle crashes a year, excuse me. Quite frankly, a lot of work zone crashes do involve speeding. In 2018, almost half of the crashes in work zones did have speeding as a contributing cause. Fatal work zone crashes, of course, are important. We were not seeing those numbers decline. Consistently, we were seeing about 20 fatal crashes a year. And whether it's our workforce working in the work zones or people traveling through those work zones, everybody traveling through them, we feel, deserves to get through them safely and get home and get to where they were going in a safe manner. So that's really important to us. One of the things that was noticed by the department and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission was that the work zone, where the crashes occurred in the work zones, more than half of them, 57% of those crashes, occurred in the activity area, really the area on the highway adjacent to where the actual work was being performed. Typically in a work zone, that's the tightest area within there. That's the hardest place to enforce using normal methods. And really, we were seeing those speeding concerns and such kind of contributing to that. And the Commonwealth, both the PennDOT and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission do have Pennsylvania State Police and law enforcement supporting work zone enforcement. However, quite frankly, that they can't be everywhere at all times. And really what we were finding is that over 80% of those crashes were occurring when law enforcement was not present. So this is a problem that's obviously has been identified and flagged for a while as an issue. Back in November 2012, the Pennsylvania State Transportation Advisory Committee actually issued a report detailing cameras in work zones. For those of you who can see the screen, those are images from Maryland's work zone speed enforcement program, which they've had going on since that started back in the late 2000s. The TAC report highlighted some of that information. From that point, the first bill was introduced in the legislation for legislation back in June of 2015, Senate Bill 840. From that point, it actually took 3 years to get the program authorized. In October of 2018, Act 86 did authorize a pilot program for work zones across the Commonwealth for highways in PennDOT and the Commission's jurisdiction. And quite frankly, that only happened because of strong advocacy and support from a wide variety of stakeholders, not only just those stakeholders, the highway construction industry, which was certainly a big backer for us, but also other groups throughout the Commonwealth to provide that strong advocacy and support for this. So after all that, what did we get? What did the legislation actually authorize for us to do? And they passed a 5-year pilot program on all PennDOT federal aid highways, which essentially means any basically major collectors and minor arterials and higher class highways from that on PennDOT system, and all Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission highways. We can enforce at any vehicles who are traveling 11 miles an hour or more over the speed limit, the posted speed limit through the work zones. And that not only includes current regulatory speed limits, but if the work zone itself has a posted speed limit reduction, we can enforce at 11 miles an hour over that posted speed limit reduction. An important thing to note is that these penalties are civil penalties. They are not criminal penalties. They are different than the your typical motor vehicle violations. And all of those fine carrying violations, and we'll get into fine structure, are reviewed by Pennsylvania State Police. We do have a tiered penalty structure involving warnings as well as monetary fines. We'll get into what that structure is, but it's well defined in the legislation. And the legislation also defines how these can be contested by violators and the appeals processes through that. So really, what are the goals of the program? And I think we stated this at the beginning, but I continue to stress this, and I can't stress this enough. This is a work zone safety program. Everything we are trying to do is to reduce speeds in work zones, improve driver behavior, improve driver attentiveness in work zones, with the goal, quite frankly, of saving worker and traveler lives. One thing that's important with this program is not intended to replace existing enforcement by the state police that we had talked about. This is intended to complement, really get to places where they cannot get to, either due to just work zone feasibility and the ability to actually get into them in the same spots that we're getting into, and really just resource allocation as well to kind of support what they're already doing. And all of this has kind of shined a kind of larger spotlight on work zone safety programs throughout the Commonwealth, and really this is being used by the agencies to help promote work zone safety across the Commonwealth. We did talk a little bit about the nature of this being a civil penalties. The legislation actually added and modified sections to Pennsylvania's current vehicle code. There were some modifications to Section 102 to define things like the automated work zones, or automated speed enforcement systems and automated work zone areas, that type of thing, to allow for this. Also added the ability to use both radar and LiDAR in this application under Section 3368 for speed timing devices as applicable devices, and also created 2 programs. Section 3369 really created and authorized the AWISE pilot program that we're talking about today, as well as Section 3370, which authorized a permanent or a pilot 24/7 program for designated highway. For those of you who are familiar, that is the Roosevelt Boulevard US 1 in Northeast Philadelphia, and it also simultaneously authorized that program. So getting into how this works a little bit and how the program works. Where does AWISE get deployed? As you can see kind of by the schematic that's on the screen right now, AWISE is really deployed right in the work zones themselves, where the activity area is occurring, past the buffer area, and we're really kind of enforcing kind of in that critical spot. Typically, state police and law enforcement, they are oftentimes enforcing in the advance warning area and the termination area. Those are the areas that they can more easily get to, but we're really kind of focused on that core automated enforcement work area. So what is AWISE itself? Everything is actually self-contained in that white Jeep that you can see on the screen. We do have a system within there that has a dual radar system. So it's actually running both an across the road and a down the road radar. The system is automated so that both radar readings must be within a certain tolerance for that violation to be even processed. If there's one, it takes one of the readings as a false reading and throws it out, and it never proceeds to the next spots. There are 2 cameras that are also involved with this, both advanced and receding. For the most part, we are taking a look and trying to use rear plates for this. The one exception to that is tractor trailers. Typically, those are driven by the tractors, which the license plates for those are in front. So that is really the need for the front plates. We generally are using the rear plates for all of the vehicles that we are trying to obtain. And then once all of those images are taken and those events are identified as individual violation events, there's software within the field unit that feeds to cloud-based databases and then goes through the back office, back checks and processing to go from the field unit to actual issuance of the violation itself. The statute is pretty explicit as far as what's required for enforcement, and we, as the program administrator team, are pretty fixated on making sure these things occur for each and every enforcement. The first and foremost thing that we want to stress is that workers must be present within the work zone for us to enforce. If there's no work, there is no active work occurring, we cannot enforce within the work zone. So we do spend quite a bit of effort to as we schedule and verify and validate to make sure that those things are happening, and we've got all of that documented and back checked appropriately. There are 2 warning signs that must be in place. At least one of them does need to indicate whether or not the speed limit, work zone speed limit system is active. We do show that here, sign here on the slide, but both of those signs need to be in place in order for enforcement to occur. We do actually have a notice on the vehicle itself, basically identifying the vehicle as an automated speed enforcement system. We also do need to show on the program's website, which, and we'll go over this again, is workzonecameras.penndot.gov, to kind of show those locations and have those locations available. If there is a work zone speed limit reduction, the reduced speed limit signs need to be there. They need to be visible. It is only fair for us to enforce at the speed limit that we are displaying to the public. And one of the big things that we also must do is we must have end work zone signs at the end of these work zones. That is to clearly indicate and demarcate the starting point of that speed limit enforcement zone, which is typically indicated by those warning signs. But the end work zone signs kind of demarcate the end of where someone might be subject for those 2 speed limit enforcement, 2 automated enforcement. As Ralph mentioned in the introduction, this program is actually being run jointly by 3 agencies who have entered into an interagency agreement to run this. Both PennDOT and the Turnpike Commission are responsible for running the program themselves as far as scheduling and developing items and quality control. PennDOT is really responsible for quite a bit of the fiscal processes. The Turnpike Commission is taking the lead with our team as far as working through vendor compliance. Both agencies are responsible for developing their own standards. However, the department was responsible for developing all of the regulations associated, taking things from the law to something that can be deployed in the field. PennDOT is also the conduit for the informal hearing officers, which we'll get into kind of what that means momentarily as well. Pennsylvania State Police is actually on board as a program partner as well. They do review all fine carrying violations as part of this and affirm that those are all correct. Pennsylvania State Police also actually goes out and does field-based quality control testing and quality control checks for us. They felt that was important. I think we completely agreed with them that their ability to go out and check those things as well, kind of somewhat independently, continues to lend credibility to the program. There are also two primary contracted services within the program. The first is the program administrator, RK&K. That's where Ben and I come in. We are basically essentially serving as staff augmentation for both agencies. We're really the ones, and our team is responsible for the project selection and scheduling of where the deployments go. We do perform a lot of QA/QC. We do a lot of program outreach activities like this presentation today, and kind of working through with the different stakeholders across the Commonwealth. We do a lot of performance monitoring and reporting, and we provide a lot of technical administrative support throughout. Redflex is the system administrator. The vehicles that you see out in the field and the operators with them are all Redflex employees. They're the ones responsible for completing the field unit development, as well as they do the first cut of the violation reviews in the back office, making sure that the vehicle records match up with the information that's provided, verifying that all of the requirements that we talked about were met. They do a lot of that stuff. But they're also responsible for mailing and dispersing the violations themselves once they've gone through all the checks and balances, and for all fine carrying, Pennsylvania State Police's checks and balances as well. Customer service and record keeping, Redflex is performing on the violation side, as well as they support the informal hearing with any kind of record keeping associated with that. And then they are also responsible for maintaining all of the annual certifications required of the units, of the vehicles, of their employees from a training perspective to keep the program operational. So what does the penalty structure look like for this program? Quite frankly, the first time someone drives through this and they receive a violation, they receive a written warning, but they do not have a monetary fine. It is a pure written warning at that point. The second violation, the second time that person violates this and is caught through the system, they receive a $75 fine, not a $750 fine. That would be excessive. Third and subsequent violations are $150 fines. We did add late fees after the non-payment of 30 days from the time that the violation is issued. Those kind of are incrementally added up and can reach up to $75 additional if someone doesn't pay their fine within 90 days of mailing. Within the first 30 days, a violator can contest the violation. There's a kind of a two-step process for that. The first is an informal hearing where they can provide defenses. The statute actually calls out 3 specific defenses. The first of which is that if you were not the registered owner of the vehicle at the time the violation occurred, which does happen. The second is if the vehicle is stolen at the time the violation occurs, which again does happen. And the third is if the equipment or setup was not working properly for that, which typically those violations do not get sent out to begin with, but that is a allowable defense to that. So those defenses are heard, those informal hearings are heard by law clerks that come from Pennsylvania's Office of Chief Counsel. Once they review those, they offer their hearing. If a violator receives a liable finding and decides to further appeal that, they do have the right within 30 days to file that or to file a letter back to the program. We then in turn have to file a hearing in the minor courts and the district courts where the violation occurred. And again, These are civil violations, so there are no merit rating changes. There are no points that you would typically get from your moving violations as part of that. So before I turn it over to Ben to talk a little bit about kind of where we are with program status, I want to talk a little bit about some of the arguments that you hear about automated enforcement and how the program has maybe been built to counteract some of those arguments and really kind of build it so that the program is credible and is really becomes a positive program. The first and foremost is that these programs, these things are typically revenue generation. Quite frankly, there are no financial incentives in any contract associated with this related to the number of violations that a specific deployment gets. Everyone's paid flat fees. Everyone is paid based on the amount of work that they've done, and it's really not tied to that at all. As part of this, we did establish and enact a statewide policy for work zone speed limits to establish really some consistency across those work zones statewide, really to defend against or counteract the argument that speed limits are artificially lowered. We do talk about the fact that the 2 warning signs are required we're not hiding these things. We are pretty much there. A lot of times you hear that the units are inaccurate, but we do have an annual laboratory recertification of each and every unit. Also, each and every unit does undergo a daily test to validate that everything is functioning properly at the beginning and the end of each shift to make sure that those things don't happen. We do have all 3 agencies kind of working as an oversight together to kind of make sure that this program is operating as appropriately as possible. We do have those defined contested appeals. And once violations are closed out, all of the images associated with this are destroyed after 1 year. And we have started working through some of that protocol now, so I can assure you that that is actually happening, and that kind of to counteract some of the violation of privacy. So with that, Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mahmood. Appreciate it. So, all right, we're going to move on to program status and kind of talk about where the program is, some of the stats that we've seen through our first year of operation. Again, the program began live enforcement on Monday, March 9th of 2020, and then operated for a week, and then a lot of the stay-at-home orders and basically the pandemic hit. So we had about a month hiatus in there, but really, calendar year, taking a look at where we've been, and we'll briefly touch on kind of where we're going with the program as well. So really our approach to how the program operates, there are 17 units identified, 10 are roughly 10 are assigned to PennDOT deployments for a given shift, and 7 assigned to Turnpike deployments for a given shift. A shift is defined as an 8-hour deployment shift. So when we schedule the units, we're scheduling them for an 8-hour window to support a construction activity, or construction or maintenance activity. When a construction or maintenance activity doesn't go a full 8 hours, we try and have multiple projects identified as backups so that we can maximize the enforcement time that we get out of those 8-hour deployment shifts. We schedule up to do 2 shifts daily. Basically, that boils down to a day shift and a night shift. That allows for some time for the vehicle to return from one shift, return to the vehicle depot, serviced, cleaned in this pandemic world, and then turned around to be able to go out for its next 8-hour shift. We support weekday and weekend activities. Not a lot of projects really have scheduled weekend activities until we get later in the year, and contractors are trying to, address punch list items or meet deadlines and that sort of thing. So really our weekend activities kind of ramp up later on in the fall. And again, as Mahmood mentioned, kind of the program goals here, the overall goal here is to improve driver behavior through Pennsylvania work zones, to improve the safety for our workers, as well as the motoring public. So how do we identify what sites or projects do we want to assign these units to? There's a wide variety of projects and maintenance activities that we have available to send these units to. So how do we really determine to receive automated work zone speed enforcement deployment? We review historic crash and speed data to identify, existing crash hotspots, corridors or areas that have a history of speed-related crashes, or either anecdotally, from field staff as well. Hey, when we know whenever we're out on roadway X, we know that there's a speeding problem out there. We'd really like to get you guys out there. So, we look at those both from a statistical and an anecdotal point of view. The construction maintenance crews that work in those specific counties or districts, really know their roads better than we do, kind of from a overall state level. So, we really take their feedback into consideration. We're working on making this predictive for future projects so that, we can identify and know right away whenever these projects come up for discussion, what projects, are going to make sense to receive, more enforcements and less enforcements. We account for worker vulnerability, where workers are protected behind positive protection barrier. There's a little bit of added protection there versus when they're behind barrels of cones in a channelized work zone, and then that kind of plays into your short-term, long-term work zone consideration there. So then we prioritize our locations, which ones, basically what's giving us our most bang for the buck in terms of these 8-hour deployment windows. Where are we seeing the speeding issues? Where are we seeing, crash clusters, that sort of thing, to make sure, again, that to achieve the program goal to improve safety, let's make sure we're actually addressing and meeting that program goal. Finally, we want to avoid regular patterns, so if we have 2 projects, we want to avoid scheduling project A for Monday, Wednesday, Friday daylight, and project B Tuesday, Thursday daylight, week in and week out. We kind of want to have that variability from project to project so that we avoid the regular patterns and kind of create a halo effect. We want Pennsylvania drivers and drivers passing through the Commonwealth to expect this automated work zone speed enforcement system in any work zone that they may drive through. So there are multiple layers of review. This is one of the things that Mahmood had touched on and kind of why Pennsylvania's program is different. He mentioned the 3-agency oversight, but again, the unit self-test at the beginning, end of shift to make sure that the speed timing devices are working properly and accurately and correctly, making sure that the camera capture equipment is working as it should. Any time that a unit doesn't pass the self-test at the start or end, if it's at the start, they can't start enforcement until they figure out and fix the problem. If it's at the end of the shift, then all the violations captured during that shift are likely null and void. Operators record all this information in a deployment log that is uploaded and included with the back office system for a given deployment. And again, they're taking pictures of worker presence, taking pictures of the signs, measuring the distances to the signs to make sure that they meet the minimums that have been set forth by both PennDOT and the Turnpike Commission, just to make sure that there is multiple layers of proof and evidence that the work zone and the automated work zone speed enforcement system was set up appropriately and according to the standards, and we're meeting all the statutory requirements for the enforcement to be valid. The image and DMV information is initially reviewed by Redflex, by the system administrator, and as Mahmood mentioned, PSP reviews all fine carrying violations and all appealed violations as well. So now let's get into some of the numbers here of what we've seen kind of in our first year of operation. We've had, as of the end of February, over 2,200 deployments that occurred with over 300,000 violations issued. Our repeat violator rate at the end of February was hovering around 11%. So basically 11% of the violations that have been captured have been fine carrying. As Mahmood mentioned, the first violation is a 0 fine penalty. Basically, don't do this again, or you're going to face financial penalties. But then 11% of the violations that have been issued are either in that $75 second violation or $150 third or subsequent violation bucket. Interesting things that we've noticed. I talked about accounting for worker protection, worker vulnerability. We've identified that speeds have been higher in barrier protected projects and channelizer protected projects. That added layer of perceived safety there in barrier protected projects, by the motorists. It seems that motorists are more inclined to speed through those barrier protected work zones. Speeds were initially high at the start of the program, obviously in the first couple months of the program being active, and through the winter. December through March. And we're accounting this for, obviously, at the start of the program, it's a new program. Folks are getting used to it. And we did see a significant decrease in the speeds through these work zones after those first few months. But then the spike in the winter, really, we're attributing to the fact that in the winter, you don't have a lot of channelizer protected work zones out there. You have more barrier protected work zones, more of the long-term work zones. And a lot of those long-term work zones, you're kind of maintaining the normal number of lanes through the work zone. So if it's normally a 2-lane section, a lot of these long-term work zones that are active over the winter are maintaining 2 lanes. So that's kind of where we're attributing some of those increased speeds over the winter to, was just the type of projects that were being supported at that time. So you can see kind of here a kind of relatively simple breakdown by agency and then for the overall program in terms of the number of deployments, and then our average number of violations per deployment. And one thing that I want to point out here is that keep in mind that these are average numbers. We have some deployments that may see 5 violations in a given deployment if volumes are low and or folks are abiding by the speed limit. We have other deployments where we have up over 1,000 violations in a given deployment. So really the variability in violations on a per deployment basis vary greatly across the system and across throughout Pennsylvania. So again, this kind of touches on the speeds that I touched on previously. Again, you can kind of see the spike there in March and April when we first started the program. Again, remember April 2020 was when a lot of the work from travel restrictions and everything with the pandemic were kind of real high. So with fewer cars on the roadway, it provided drivers with the opportunity to really put the hammer down and with less interference from surrounding traffic. And then you could really see that spike again after November. So really December through March, and really peaking in January there for both the percent over the speed limit, which is, anyone going, in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, the blue line would represent folks going 56 or over. The orange line would indicate the folks that are going 11 miles an hour or over the posted speed limit, or, basically the folks that would be captured and identified and issued a violation in our program. So, in a 55 work zone, the orange line represents folks traveling 66 miles an hour or over through the work zone. So we wanted to touch on some of our success stories. Again, we have a number of projects that we've actually been supporting since the program began. These speeds are taken from INRIX data. The first project to discuss is I-78 Section 12M, which is a total reconstruction job on I-78 up in Berks County. Before the program even started back in September 2019, you could see that the average speed through there was about 62 miles an hour. And then June 2020, when the program had been active for a few months, and then September 2020, when we had about 6 months in with the program, you can kind of see that trend in average speeds dropping pretty consistently across that. The same trend can be seen for the I-476 Northeast Extension A31 reconstruction that had been going on just north of King of Prussia, Norristown area. You can kind of see that same trend being exhibited over time last year. So taking a look at work zone crashes, 2018, 2019 were fairly consistent, as Mahmood had mentioned. 2020, kind of a significant drop. Now, we're not attributing this drop entirely to the automated work zone speed enforcement program. Obviously, there were a lot less miles traveled by traffic throughout 2020 due to the pandemic and some of the stay-at-home orders. But we would like to think that our program did play a role in lowering speeds in work zones and preventing some crashes along the way here. All right, so we're taking about the worker protection. And again, this kind of comes back to what I had mentioned about, barrier versus channelizer and some of the trends that we've been seeing with that the speeds have been higher in barrier protected work zones and channelizer. Really, the big takeaway here is the columns that represent the percent over speed limit. You can see that is, fairly consistent across both agencies, right around 44%. In the barrier, and then you compare that to the channelizer, it's about half, basically 22% were traveling over the speed limit. And then that percent excessive speeding, again, is vehicles traveling 11 miles an hour or more over the posted speed limit. And again, it's just about double in the barrier protected work zones and the channelizer protected work zones. And again, we're just presenting this to kind of highlight some of the trends and interesting things that we've seen with the program. On the turnpike side, this is an interesting thing, and again, further supports the barrier versus channelizer protection theory. On the turnpike, you could see in the blue the number of total recon deployments that we've had, and then on the right chart, the number of potential violations. You can see that over 3/4 of the potential violations on turnpike roadways have been from less than half of the deployments. So, deployments in total recon are less than half of all the turnpike deployments, and over 3/4 of the violations that come from those. And with about the remaining, less than a quarter coming from millfield projects, bridge projects, and maintenance projects, basically those that would typically be protected by channelizer devices. So as our role as the program administrator team for PennDOT and the Turnpike for this program, one of our jobs is to make sure that the agencies can budget funds appropriately to support the program. And there's a number of risk factors involved with developing a program budget for a program such as the automated work zone speed enforcement. The big one here is violation rate. A 1% change in the violation rate of traffic passing our units can result in up to a 30% variability in the amount of revenue that's coming into the program. And again, I'll emphasize, this program is not a revenue generating program. This program is a safety program. This program, is expected and anticipated, and the agencies understand and are comfortable that this program, is not supposed to, be some silver bullet to make them loads of money. It's a safety program to keep the motoring public and the workers safe. Some of the other topic or subjects of variability with developing our program budget are the repeat violator rate. Again, that repeat rate is the percentage of folks that are getting fine carrying violations. So that plays a role in that. So as that repeat rate goes down, the revenue coming in will likely go down as well. The traffic volumes, again, that's kind of your denominator in both of those calculations. And then the work zone configuration, again, mentioning the barrier versus channelizer. The more channelizer work zones that we support, the less violations that we've been seeing on a per deployment basis. And then the payment rate's critical. As part of the legislation, really the only recourse that we have for non-payment is to send it to collections, but there's nothing tied to vehicle registration or anything like that, like some other states have. So our hands are kind of tied with what our recourse actions are, with the ability to go after non-paying violators. So some of the issues that we had this year, obviously COVID, it impacted the ability for the system administrator to staff up and be able to support the level of deployments that we were hoping to accomplish in 2020. And the impact on operations, again, most noticeable in April and May with decreased volumes and increased speeds that I touched on previously. Quality control, there are a couple, with any program, there's going to be growing pains. And there are a number of quality control items that we found and have addressed with, everyone on the team, just making sure that things are, checking out and being caught as early as possible. Just to make sure that, that everything's on the up and up with the program. We want to avoid any black eyes for the program, and we want everything to operate the way that it's supposed to. So up on the screen are just some examples of some of the back office QC and some of the field QC that we had seen throughout the year, and that, just it's continual quality improvement for everyone involved with the program moving forward. So with that, we can open it up for Q&A in a little bit, but I did have one other thing that I wanted to bring up for everyone's interest, and give me 1 second.
Yeah, while Ben loads that, we kind of had hot off the presses. We actually had, were reached out this morning with some video images of people traveling through the work zone. And you can kind of see how this is coming together. So you can see the second of the signs on the bottom left of your screen. You can see the vehicle, the automated enforcement vehicle, kind of in the middle, and you can kind of see the actual road work. And I think it kind of was striking to all of us, as you can see almost every vehicle, as they're starting to see the sign coming into the work zone, really slowing down as they are approaching this work area, and kind of maintaining that slow speed as they kind of get through that activity area. So we were, from this bird's eye view, we were actually kind of pretty happy to see kind of the visual that really supported kind of the data that we've been seeing, and something we hope to validate a little bit more of moving forward. So Ben, I think with that, thank you very much. And I see there are a few questions.
Hey, Mahmood and Ben, I want to thank you both for your presentation today. I'm going to go through our QA. For anyone who has not or would like to go and view some of the QA questions, go to the QA area on the top right of your screen. You can add some questions as we go along. First one was just a clarification on when the legislation was passed. Mahmood or Ben, if you could provide that info.
Yeah, the Act 86 was passed in October of 2018. And actually took effect in February of 2019. And it's a 5-year pilot, so it is authorized through February of 2024.
First question we have is, why aren't the systems located permanently in a work zone to maintain speed limits similar to Maryland? Is there a speed record to verify the speeds don't increase when systems aren't present?
Ben, I could take this one. Quite frankly, the reason why we don't have more permanent systems in work zones is that the legislation, quite frankly, asks us to, or requires by statute, that we only enforce at time when workers are present. Part of the that was something that was included as part of, for lack of a better term, the legislative sausage making to get it to this point. That the best way to kind of handle that is to really have these units kind of being mobile. The advantage that it allows us, though, that is different than Maryland's program, is that we have the ability to enforce at short-term work zones, at maintenance work zones. We really can run the gamut, whereas they're usually typically located in more active permanent work zones, as the question alluded to. And to the second part of that question, we are actually taking a look at that right now as far as whether or not those speeds do increase when the systems aren't present. That is a great question. And, again, part of this being a pilot program are answers to questions just like that to maybe not only refine our approach as far as operating the program, but hopefully, if this does continue to show the promise that it's showing, what refinements can be made as far as whether it be legislative or other regulatory things as the program moves forward.
Is there interest in widening the camera enforcement to enforce proper work zone installation and management. For example, down cones, missing items, protruding hazards, etc.
So again, Ben, I'll take this one. I think the answer at this point is not yet there. And again, it's kind of maybe a different type of enforcement when you're talking about that type of thing. I will say though that through the QC process that our team has been doing, we have uncovered a lot of those types of things and have been working with the department and the Turnpike Commission to help improve some of those types of processes as well. And it's definitely, I mentioned earlier, it's helped shine a light a little bit more on all kinds of things, work zone safety. That question and the types of things that have been identified certainly are a part of it. I'll also add that, folks that are on kind of our scheduling and QC team will field phone calls relating to those types of things. And oftentimes those can get corrected in the field right then and there because of that. So it has been helpful with those regards.
Next is a two-part question. Is there any data yet on the percentage of violations overturned on appeal? And if so, have those cases revealed opportunities to tighten up the process? And are the possible overturnings caused by signage or inconsistent speed setups by the camera equipment?
So I'm gonna, Ben, I'll defer to you with this. My gut or my initial answer to this is very rarely, but I'll turn it over to Ben to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks, Mahmood. So, yeah, generally, of the violations that have gone through the informal hearing process, the vast majority have been upheld by the informal hearing officers. The ones that have been overturned are generally from the three defenses that Mahmood outlined. The vehicle was stolen, the vehicle was stolen, or the individual was not the owner at the time of the violation. There are some one-off instances that there's some sort of other unique thing at play. A DMV return came back with a vehicle mismatch or something. That the DMV information had not been updated, that sort of thing. But very rarely, if any, of the violations that have gone through the informal hearing process have been overturned due to an issue with the speed timing devices, the camera capture equipment, or anything of that nature. Whenever we do have those violations that are appealed go through that process, and if they're overturned, we do have biweekly debriefs with the informal hearing officers to make sure that we are keeping on top of any trends that they're seeing. If there are any issues with specific deployments that they're seeing, hey, we've had 10 requests for hearing on a deployment that happened at this day at this location or something, then we can go back and look at that actual deployment and say, oh, okay, yeah, there was something wrong here, or that sort of thing. But yeah, the vast majority of the ones that are overturned are, kind of outside the fault of the program or outside the fault of the system administrator. Mahmood, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add there.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is, does the Pennsylvania State Police have input into site selections?
I will say formally no. They are generally, kind of hands off on the administration of that side of things. Certainly, as a program partner, though, as if they are noticing specific areas, specific issues that are kind of hot spots, they will informally bring it to our attention. That said, by and large, anything that they're bringing to our attention, our field folks have brought to our attention, kind of almost screaming with alarm bells. well before Pennsylvania State Police brings it to our attention. And that's not through any fault of PSP. Quite frankly, that's just because we've been saying nobody knows the work zones better than the folks that are working in them day in and day out.
Mahmood, something that I think I'll add there is PSP, leaves copies and is kept updated with the schedules on a weekly basis. And as things change, as things may change within a week in terms of where the units are going to be. And the field checks that Mahmood alluded to, the PSP does, are unannounced. Us on the program administrator team don't know what deployments that PSP is going out to check, what days they're going out, what deployments they're actually going to check, that sort of thing. So, it kind of keeps everyone in the field on their toes as to, hey, we need to make sure that our stuff is set correctly because PSP may be showing up. So let's just make sure we do it right across the board so there's no questions and no issues.
Okay, next question, and this is our last posted currently, so if anyone has questions they'd like to add to the board, please post them at this time. Does the Pennsylvania State Police have access to some or all of the state databases of vehicular registrations, and do the cameras see through the license plate shields?
Ben, you want me to take this one?
You could take the first part. I'm happy to take the second part.
Okay. So with regards to this, really the license plate lookups are usually done by the system administrator, the vendor. They do have access to some state databases directly. They are also using third party for some of the states that are maybe not as close that are being used. For example, and I'll throw this as kind of an extreme, we're not seeing a lot of Hawaii license plates here in Pennsylvania. However, they do have a direct verified lookup, and we help them through that process to get that approved with Pennsylvania and nearly all of the neighboring states to get that information directly from their databases. And there are some pretty strict contractual provisions within our contract, basically indicating that they can only use that information for purposes of this program. If they're ever caught using it otherwise or compromising it, the privacy side of it, they'd be in breach of their overall contract, that type of thing. So there's definitely a lot of security associated with that. So Ben, you want to take the second part?
I can kind of touch on the second part here. So regarding the license plate cover specifically, it depends on, since each work zone is different and each setup is different every day, the angle of the camera to the lane can change, the offset from the lane can change. So there's not really a blanket answer. I've seen violations go through with vehicles that did have covers on them because the plate was easily identifiable and readable. There are other ones where maybe the lighting is subpar, or just something's off with the image, or it didn't come through clearly with the plate cover that it prevented it from being a good violation and being able to be sent out. So I don't think there's really a blanket answer. I've seen it kind of go both ways, but I think there's too many variables to kind of make a blanket statement of yes, all of them are rejected, or no, all of them go through kind of deal. So I think it's a number of variables that kind of go into that.
Ben, I'll add to that. In theory, they should be able to read through most of the license plate shields, but all the variables that Ben added to that maybe affect the efficiency of that.
There's one verification question. Is everything tied to the owner of the vehicle and not the operator, like a parking ticket, similar to a parking ticket?
That is correct. So that's the civil penalty side of it, is it's tied to the owner of the vehicle. And again, that was done for privacy concerns. If you look at the sample violations that are on workzonecameras.penn.gov, or if you've been lucky enough to receive one of these, you'll see that all of the images associated with them you can't see any individuals in the vehicle, and that's by design, to protect the privacy of those driving.
Well, that's the end of our questions that are posted this time. I'd like to thank Todd for being our maintainer of the gate for everything for us. I'd like to thank Ralph for being the moderator. I'd especially like to thank Mahmood and Ben for the time they've taken to do the presentation today on the active work zone traffic enforcement. I think it's been very educational and informative for everyone involved.